everybody. Thanks for joining me. My name is Robert Perry. I'm the Head of Research at Picklejar Communications. We're the content strategy consultancy based in the UK. We are the people behind Utterly Content. And you'll have heard from my boss Tracy at some point in this conference, I have no doubt. There'll be others of us around and about you might hear from. But I have a very specific thing that I want to talk to you about today. You can see the title of my talk is Give Me the Numbers, Why Measurement and Evaluation is the Key to Successful Content. I think if you're here listening to me, then you probably already feel this way. But I'd like to give you a bit of background to this, a bit of kind of an argument almost to make as to why this is an important thing to do, but hopefully you can potentially take to others in your organisations to help convince them about the value of measurement and evaluation and of doing it properly and of helping it, building it into our strategies. Now, before we go too deep into this, I'll just say that at Picklejar, I'm in charge of the kind of research, evaluation, in charge of insights, of user testing, of anything that's to do with kind of gathering information about what's working, what's not, who our audiences are, what they want to see, all that kind of thing. And most of our clients are education-based. They're universities, colleges, schools, and we tend to focus on the kind of the website side of things for them. We do a lot of stuff. It's all over its website, social media, it's print and everything. But some of the stuff I'm going to talk about today will probably feel quite webby. But I think that's probably the case for most of us. So yeah, I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to start with a few quotes for you. So the first quote that I want to share with you today is this line from Jerry McGovern, who says that HIT stands for How Idiots Track Success. You might have heard this before. I think Jerry's probably being a little bit harsh here. I think he's got a point. His kind of underlying message here is that there's that stuff at the top line, the high level information, for some of them it's vanity metrics. They're not massively useful. It's great to see that number at the top line, it's great to see it going up and up and up, that's fantastic. But it doesn't really tell us much about, whether, what we're producing is actually helpful to people, about whether our content is actually successful. There's rarely any value found in measuring the volume of what's going on. That real value comes from understanding the experience of our users, of our audiences, as they're trying to get their tasks done. And I know we will all have people who want to know what the top numbers are. It quite often happens at high levels that people maybe don't understand quite the level of detail that we need to go down to understand what's actually happening with our content. And that leaves us with providing them some big numbers. And, sometimes that's what we need to do. And sometimes, that top line can be helpful. But I think it's always worth bearing in mind that, that volume thing is not really what we should be going for. What we're looking for are kind of satisfied users. And this next quote comes from John Hayes, who was Chief Marketing Officer at American Express. And he said that we tend to overvalue the things we can measure and undervalue the things we can't. And this ties into to Jerry McGovern's quote from the previous slide. Things that are there that we can measure feel kind of attractive and kind of easy in a way, that like here's a line that we can follow, we can track this number, and therefore it's useful and it's valuable to us. And we just said before about page views and hits. It's not always the case. Just because we can track it doesn't mean it's helpful. I always had this theory that this comes from kind of the early days of both kind of of the web and of social media, where you would see blogs with with hit counts on them, or you'd have tracking the number of followers on a social media account was like a game. You get a high score. Even things like the thankfully essentially defunct Clout, where you're trying to game the system to try and get more kind of kudos on social media. None of that kind of really helped anyone produce decent content. It just had numbers. Thankfully, we've moved on from that now. But again, it's always worth reminding ourselves of this kind of underlying idiom, really, that we need to be thinking about why we are measuring things and not just because they're there. And then a further corollary, going back even further back in time with Goodhart's law, which is that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Now, this is Charles Goodhart. He was an economist in the 70s. And this comes from kind of economic policy, this theory that if you turn something into a particular target that you need to hit, so I think in his case he was talking about inflation, where if you decide to keep inflation at 1% in your country, or whatever figure as a target, then rather than tracking inflation and using it to help you decide, what you can do with the economy, then your policies become focused on making that number down, just keeping that number at 1%. So you become focused on the target, on the number, rather than on what your policies are actually going to do in reality. And so for us, tracking and measuring things it's really helpful. It shows us what's happening, what's not happening, what's working, what's not working. But for me, the issue comes when we start to assign KPIs and start reporting on those things as a definition of success in itself. If something goes up or down, if the numbers on the website go up or down, is that, has somebody failed? I don't think that's what we should be looking at. It's very tempting to aim just for the thing you said you are going to target, rather than looking at things in the round and looking at why things are working and not working. So, one last quote from me, which is in this session I'm not going to tell you what to measure. Now, I know that's maybe kind of what you're here for. And obviously we will talk about different measures and things that you can measure and so on. It's a little bit of a pointless measurement session otherwise. But what I mean here is that every activity we do, every kind of communication, every campaign, or whatever, will all require a different approach. There are some things that that are useful in a lot of cases, are applicable kind of across many different tactics and strategies and so on. But usually you're going to need to decide which ones are valuable to you based on what it is that you're actually trying to do. Now, hopefully today we can work through some of that. We can start understanding a little bit more about what works for an individual, for an organisation, for a team, whatever. Okay. So this is what we're here to talk about today. We're going to talk about measurement. And what's the point of it? Why do we do it? What value does it bring to us? Now, the main thing for me is that measurement is fundamental to understanding the success of our activity. Measuring and evaluating what we do it helps us meet our goals and objectives. Like, we all have them on an individual level, on a team level, as a company or a university, whatever. We all have goals and objectives, and if we measure them, we can understand a bit more about how well we're doing. And that's the main thing. But also, measurement is fun. At least that's what I think of it, and I'm sure that there must be people listening to this who are in a similar mindset to me. But it's fun. You get to play with numbers. You get to do experiments. You get to there's loads of tools to play with and new things to try out. You get to test stuff, try new things. It's just really interesting. All in the service of helping people achieve their goals, whoever they are. But it can be really fun. Like, you can get to kind of present cool things back to people and say, look, we did this and it worked really well. It's fun. Now, maybe some of the stuff that we talk about today is not as fun as all that, but it is. Like, and that's what I try and do, is try and think about it. Like, this is something cool that we can do, as well as having a purpose at the end. Like, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to write a report. It's something that's actually actively entertaining and fun. Okay. And there is a slight downside to my attitude on that, which is exemplified in this XKCD comic, which is the strategy A takes a little bit of time, strategy B takes a little bit of time, and analysing whether strategy A or B is more efficient takes a long time. And that's the reason why we can often waste time on measurement and analysis. It can be hugely, hugely helpful, but it can drag you down a little bit. So that's where those other quotes come in. It's like understanding what it is that we want to measure, why we're measuring what we're measuring, like understanding what we're tracking, and setting benchmarks that align with those goals, the things that we actually want to achieve. And that saves us from wasting time. We still get to have some fun, and we're also helping people get to what they need. And there's another reason why measurement can take a long time. It's because there's so much stuff, so many things to measure. There's a ridiculous amount of stuff out there that we can measure. This is only some of it, and I've gone very heavy on kind of automated website and social media accounts here. There's all kinds of things that aren't included on this list. There's a ridiculous amount of stuff. But remember the quotes that we saw earlier. Just because we can measure it doesn't mean that it's important. We need to pick and choose what we're focusing on. Are there ways to determine what's important to our users and to us that work together and allow us to avoid measuring all the things? We don't need to do that. We could spend a lot of time doing that. That would be great. Measure absolutely everything and then kind of decide what we want. But it's time consuming. It's a bit of a waste of effort. What we want to do is work out what's important so that we can then track that and determine whether it's successful for us. Okay. So first we need to kind of take a step back and think, what does success actually look like? Now, for me, there's a little equation that works quite well for determining this. And for me, it's a combination of the organisation's goals, whether you're a small business, whether you're a school, whether you're a charity, whatever you are, there's organisational goals. You want to achieve those things. And then there's the audience's goals, like your users, your customers, whoever. What is it that they want to do? What do they need to achieve in their lives? What is the task right now that they're trying to get done? And the alignment of those two is where success is. When that is done and that is done. If you only get one and not the other, not massively successful. And I think it's helpful sometimes to take those organisational goals that we have and almost turn them into user stories. The content design process of assigning our audience with tasks that they want to do and how they want to do them, why they want to do them. But we can do that for ourselves. Like, think of us as the user. What is it we need to do? So we need to do whatever, and so our content must something else. So is it that you're trying to convey a certain message, in which case the content has to be written in that way? Is it that you need to get people to sign up for something, in which case content must encourage them to do that? You can get down to a micro level with this, but you can do it on a broad, overarching level as well. And I think it's always worth taking your own organisational goals and trying to define them in this way, determining what it is that the content has to do to achieve that. So let's take a quick example. So, as an organisation that needs to sell phalanges, our content must encourage people to buy phalanges. It's a pretty straightforward thing. If there will be nuances around this, but if your organisation is solely focused on the one thing of selling a phalange, then your content has to encourage people to do that. And we'll get on to what it is that they want to do a little bit later. But this is where we need to be coming from. So like I say, if you're selling something, that's it's quite often to assign a reasonable kind of motivation behind your content. But you might have a different purpose. You might be the NHS in the UK, who is looking to reduce the cost of people not turning up to doctor's appointments. And so you want to produce content that encourages people to actually attend their appointments. That makes sense. So it's just worth putting that step in to kind of understand what it is that you're trying to achieve this, and so the content must do this. Now, I know we're a little way in. I haven't really touched on measurement yet, but it's because this is really important. If we don't know why we're measuring things, the whole exercise becomes a little bit pointless. So we talked about why we want to be doing this and the value of understanding our own objectives before we get into this. But then the secondary part of that is the audiences. What is it that they want? So for me, there's a few things we need to know, and I'm not going to go down a big long track of audience research, although I do think that's hugely important. That is what I spend a lot of my time doing. It does need to be done. It's hugely valuable. You may have information on that already, or you may have other plans to help you do that. But research is going to tell you what your audiences are like. Who are they? What do they want? What do they do? When they're not getting involved with us, what else are they doing in their lives? Where are they active online and off? What are they doing? What type of content do they prefer? Find out what it is that they actually want. Really helps us tailor what we're going to do. And then we add our bits to it. We add what do we want them to do? And then of course that kind of ultimate question of how do we measure our success with them? The audiences can be all kinds of people. There's all kinds of different, as individual levels, or as where they come from, whether it's a demographic thing, whether it's motivational. There's so many different ways to categorize our audiences, and content creation for different audiences requires different approaches, and so does measurement. A measurement of how those audiences are behaving and interacting with us requires a different approach depending on who that audience is. This is the big thing. It requires us to measure different things to understand whether a particular audience has interacted with a particular bit of content in a way that counts as success. They have different ways of behaving online, and it's not necessarily our job to change that. You might want to, but I feel it's more that we have to recognise how those behaviours work and adjust our way of measuring to understand that. So if there's a particular measurement of success is how often a particular article has been shared online somewhere, we've got that as a way of measuring success. But we find out that our audience actually doesn't do that kind of thing. They don't share stuff. They're far more likely just to read it and move on. If they're that kind of person, then that's not a good measurement of our success. We need to adjust. We need to change. So I'm just going to give you an example here of a user journey. This is one that we developed for students. This is their application journey, their journey to university. They're going through different stages of understanding and interpreting the information that they're given, seeking out information in different places, and getting different kinds of content as they go through. And they will, at different stages of this journey, they'll interact with it in different ways, and different types of student will interact with it in different ways. And understanding how we can provide them with the right sort of stuff, the more we know about the audience, the more they know what they want, the better able we are to give them what they need. And that helps us achieve our goals in turn. And we're able to kind of measure and track and see what is working on that journey. And we can break our audiences down in lots of different ways. I'm just going to use this as an example. This is the social technographics profile from Groundswell by Liam Burnoff. And this describes different online behaviours, mostly focused on social media when this was created, but it's applicable to other parts of online behaviour as well. And what you have here are different levels of interaction, almost. You have a creator who produces a lot of original content, a conversationalist who will start conversations and start off discussions and so on. You have critics who will maybe not create their own stuff but will respond to someone else's. You have a collector who kind of gathers things from different places. Back in the day they might use Pinterest, Storyfy, that kind of thing. We have joiners who will join a social network site and then maybe just lurk, not really say much. We all know people like that. I'm a bit like that on Instagram. I just watch what everyone else is doing. There's spectators who don't even join stuff. They just kind of watch. They just go where they want to go online, don't necessarily join in with stuff. And then you have people who are inactive online and don't actually get involved, don't go online at all. Now, this is just one way of breaking the audiences down. Everyone will have their own different kind of personas and tribes and demographic breakdowns and so on. But the thing that's important here is that if we know what the likely behaviour is of those different audience types, then we can decide what measurements are going to be most useful to us. Now, there will be overlap between different communities and different audience types, but like I say, the important thing is to know how those different audiences interact with content, which then helps us understand how we can track success with them. So if we take these as an example, there's different metrics can be used to assess success with the different audiences. Sometimes a metric or a statistic that's pretty worthless for some things can be really valuable for another audience. So I've got some examples here of, for a creator, if they're actively posting their own content about your organisation, then that's a great thing to be able to track. That's brilliant. They'll maybe respond to your content, or you can track the amount of interactions on a piece of content they've created about you. That's a really helpful thing to be able to look at. But then you have somebody like the joiner, the spectator, who doesn't necessarily have that activity that we can actively track. If all they're doing is coming to our site and leaving again, having found their information, maybe something like page views and time on site and so on is it's a useful thing. It's a helpful thing to be able to look at how that audience interacts with us. If you've got conversationalists as your audience and they're going to comment anyway, then what you really want is what's in those comments. You don't just want the number, you want to know what they're saying. So it's the value of what's in the comments that's important there. And even inactive audiences, people who don't go online, they do things that we can track. Sometimes it'll be purchases, sometimes it'll be coming to an event, or signing up for physical mail. They will be doing things that that we can follow in some form. So we've learned about our audiences, and we know more about how they like to behave. So for me, the next little equation we need to put together is audience behaviour in their wider life and what they do online, and then their interactions with our content. We need to put those two things together and kind of work out the success of individual pieces of content within our overarching kind of content ecosystem. We need to know how well each individual thing is doing. So I'm going to take a jump back to our previous goals that we had, our own user stories. If we need to sell phalanges, then our content must encourage people to buy the phalanges. Now, with e-commerce things, it's, we can track this with analytics. It's often quite straightforward. It's easy to see where people arrived on a site, did they read a particular article about the uses of phalanges and then go on to buy some phalanges? We can often track those through. We've got all the code set up and everything. Even in a low-tech way, you can, if you've got a particular code or a coupon that lets people go into a shop and purchase their phalange as a result of something that you've written in a newspaper, there's easier ways to track that. I know there's a lot of intricacies to it, and I know that it's more complicated than that. But with something that has a kind of defined end goal like that, and a defined thing that you can follow through the journey, it makes it easier to make that work. Google Analytics, even doing kind of A/B testing on content and so on, it will help us understand which bits of content, which changes we're doing are increasing those metrics, whether that's a sales conversion rate or whether it's the average order value, whatever it is. Basically, whether they bought that phalange, we can track that. But in our other example, the reducing the cost of people not turning up to doctor's appointments. So we need content that's going to actually encourage people to attend their appointments. And, there's a lot of things like this out there. There's a lot of content that doesn't exist to sell something. Again, we work with universities, and although there is the going to university concept, there's a lot of other content out there that is kind of support content. There's just basic facts, there's advice, there's specific instructions on how to do something, there's information on what to do if you're in an offline context. So how do you know that people have taken that information and applied it correctly? These are all kind of things that are common to, like I say, things like universities. There's often charities that are similar, government websites, but they do exist in commercial situations as well. So help and support content on Amazon, for example. There's a lot of pages like that about actually helping people do something, and how are we able to track that people have understood and acted on that content in a way that works for them. So this appointment booking example is something that the NHS actually did have an issue with. They probably still do. But the cost of people booking an appointment and filling that slot and then not turning up. So there's lots of wasted time within a doctor's diary for each day because people just don't turn up to their appointments. So one of the ways they tried to solve this was to send people messages, text messages, just to say, a day before or a week before, don't forget your appointment is coming up on this day at this time. And that made a difference, reminding people, particularly the day before, that they had an appointment and what time it was at. Had an uplift in the number of people who then actually came and attended their appointments. But there were still people who didn't come. And the next thing they tried, in a blind test, in A/B testing, was to send messages to some people which actually included their name in the text. So instead of just saying you've got an appointment at this time with the doctor, it would say, hello Robert, you've got an appointment tomorrow at this time with your doctor. And that made a difference again. More people paid attention to it because it had their name in. And sometimes it's just a simple change like that that can make a big difference. So, adapting to the way that people understood how those messages were being sent to them, and they saw that it was actually relevant to them, and they followed the instructions. It can make a difference. And that's what we need to try and work out. Does our content help people achieve their goals? So, in the NHS example, if they were just sending them a text that people ignored, it wasn't going to help them in any way. But providing them a little cue, oh, hang on, I need to pay attention to this, that helps people actually achieve the goal of getting to their appointment. And how do we know that our content is helping people do that? What can we track to understand that? And my answer to that is that we ask the audience. We've got access to them. They are our audience. So let's do the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire thing. Let's ask them. So let's take a quick look at some of those examples from our audience breakdown earlier. these different audience types, because we know about them, because we know their preferred online behaviours and the kind of people they are and what they like to do, we can then use that to do our research with them and understand what kind of things they might get involved in. So if we know we've got a chunk of the audience who are conversationalists, then they're going to be up for taking part in some kind of live feedback panel, or answering a pop-up chat box on the website. They're going to get involved in that kind of thing. The critics are going to be the ones who will leave us reviews. They will comment in boxes that we give them. They are going to tell us how we could improve our services. They'll offer their feedback. The joiners, they might be willing to take part in some user testing, kind of remote stuff, automated user testing, where they don't necessarily have to interact that much, but they just kind of take part. It's fine, they can do that. And others might not want to do any of those things, but they might be perfectly willing to respond on an ISET poll, or we can do some behind the scenes A/B testing and so on people like that. There are different ways to get the feedback from different people, but because we know about our audience, because we've done our research earlier, we know how we can then do more research with them. We know what kind of things they'll respond to, how they'll interact with us. Knowing all that kind of thing make a huge difference to understanding how successful we've been. Looking at an example of one of these ways that we can ask the audience is these little thumbs up, thumbs down, yes, no symbols that we see all over the web. You'll have seen them yourself, you might have used them yourself on bits of your content. And these things are, they're quite helpful. They give us an immediate indication of whether somebody found your content to be useful. You provided them hopefully with the answer to their question, or at least your best stab at it based on what they've been looking for and how they got to the content, and then they get to say yes or no. Now, my biggest issue with these kind of measurements, tracking these, is that in a lot of cases, this is all you get. You get yes or no. This particular example I've used here, I'm not going to name them, but you say yes and you say no, and that's it. That's all you get. You don't get to fill in a comment form. You don't get to say why you found it helpful or not helpful. And there are some that do that. There are ones that offer you options. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, this didn't have the information I need, or wasn't relevant, or is out of date, or giving people an option to say why it is they didn't find it helpful. And then there are others that do include that form that say, why didn't you find this helpful? What was missing? And that kind of stuff is the thing that really lets us understand whether the content has been successful or not, for getting that person to the right piece of information. Because for me, there's ways we can do this just in general website use, where we get to ask them, what is it that they're actually looking for? So whether you do this through chatbots or pop-up surveys or whatever, but you can ask them what they're looking for. And then when they're done, asking them, what information do you still need? Even that question at the bottom of every bit of content, what do you still need from us, is a way to understand what's been missing in their journey. What bit of their task have they not managed to do? I think that's the thing that's really important, is trying to work out which bits we haven't been able to provide them with. Because understanding all that allows us to then move to evaluation, is looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the content that we're creating. And this is something that we have to be doing constantly. Measurement and evaluation is not like a one and done thing. It's not just like, here's our report, we send it off, and then we just carry on with our lives. We have to be constantly tracking what's happening and what's working, what's not, and make those changes. So if people are saying that that content is not useful and it's because it misses out this key bit of information, then we need to update that. Then we'll get the next month report, find out whether it's working, and so on. But there's also, context is vital. There are times when that information will not be useful for different reasons. Is there a sudden influx in new visitors to the site because of something else that happened? And that doesn't necessarily make information incorrect, but maybe it shows us that it's not right for this new kind of user that we're finding. So how can we update and how can we adapt to that? We need to be looking for those common factors in our positive results that we find. So you look for the things that have been working well across different types of content, across different areas of the site. Are there commonalities that seem to be making this work for this type of audience? It's helping them get to their goals quicker and faster and more efficient. What can we draw from that? And then identifying those weak points. I was talking at the start about our tendency to try and latch on to the big numbers, to try and share those kind of their hit rates and the page views and so on, and that's what people want to hear. But we also need to not steer away from identifying our weak points and for telling people that this is something that is not working. Like, we've tried this and it didn't work. This doesn't work for our audience, because otherwise we're not going to find out the cause. We're not going to be able to test it and try and improve. And that's the next thing, is that improvement. How do we take those bits of measurement that we've done, those ongoing reports, those tests that we might be running, and try and improve? And we need to find out where we went wrong. Potentially, we need to find out what bits we need to build on. Is it something that's a content issue itself? Is it something to do with the platform, or is it maybe a timing thing? With content, it can be particular words or the images we've used, or the length of a piece of content. Even the topic itself, is it the right thing? Are we? And then there's platform and format. Should we be producing something in a video format? For people who prefer that kind of thing, what's the vast majority of our audience going to want? Is it worth doing an audio recording of something? Do we have enough people who want to be able to listen to our content that makes it worthwhile? Is this something we should even be putting on our website? Is this something that needs to be in an email that goes out to people? Should it be something that goes on our social media pages, or vice versa? There's so many different ways of understanding how the audience interacts with us, and platform is a huge part of that. And timing, again, is kind of built in with platform, but are we producing stuff at the right time, whether that's time of day, time of week, time of the year? Have we scheduled this in a way that actually works for the audience and the journey that they're taking and the things they need to do? The example that I always come back to is sending emails at particular times of day for students. So there's universities have done tests on this kind of thing, and if you send an email out to students on the hour, they tend not to read it, because they tend to be starting a lecture or a seminar or something at 10 o'clock, for example. But if you send it at 5 to 11, nearly an hour later, but not quite, when they're probably all checking their phones and checking their laptops just at the end of the lecture, there's far more chance of them opening it and reading it. It's very crude. There needs to be more analysis done on that, but as a concept, it's fine. It's an idea to test, and that testing is something that we can do all the time. Everyone uses A/B tests of various kinds to see whether things work. Trying to work out where we went wrong, showing different people different versions of things, showing our different parts of the same audience different types of things to see what works with them. In a former job, I was asked to run an A/B test on the inclusion of an exclamation mark in a subject heading of an email, just to see whether that made people more likely to open it, and I was convinced that it didn't make any difference. Because I don't like overuse of exclamation marks. But to my chagrin, it was in fact true that people did seem more likely to open an email with an exclamation mark in the header. So unfortunately I was beaten by the data on that one, but I'm happy to take my lessons and move on. And there are so many ways that things like this kind of bump up against our own personal interpretations of how these should work. There's an example here on the page of two types of form for a car selling website in the States, where you have the standard form on the left, where you just show people the boxes they need to fill in and they fill it in. And then the alternative version, which is kind of fill in the gaps in a paragraph. You fill it in as though you're filling in the blanks in a form letter. And this new version got, depending on the audience and so on, tended to get around 25 to 30% more entries through that kind of fill in the blanks paragraph form version. Now, to me, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but maybe that's because I'm used to filling in forms on the websites, and this is a way that works for other people. And that's the thing, it helps them achieve their goal, makes their life easier, and gets you the thing that you need as well. And that's the question that we've been trying to answer, is does our content help people achieve their goals? That's what counts as success. If our content is doing that, then we have been successful. We've started to answer that question about whether our content is helping people to achieve their goals. Because if our audience is able to achieve their goals, then we should be able to achieve ours. Our organisational goals should be aligned to the audience goals. By helping them do what they need to do, that helps us do what we need to do. That's what success looks like. So if we're able to track that, if we have been measuring and analysing and evaluating what our audience has been doing and how they've been interacting with our content, whether they are able to do what they need to do, that'll tell us how successful we've been. So when we're thinking about that kind of strategic success, that organisational goal that we want to hit, the audience goal that we want to hit, I think it's always worth coming back to these quotes that I showed you at the start, the kind of underlying sentiment of them. In any case, the idea that we're after the small interactions, we're after customer satisfaction, we're after whether something was actually useful to somebody, the number of visits and how long they spent on the site. It can help, but it's not going to tell us really what's going on and whether the content that we produce has been successful. That's not going to be that helpful. I said it before, but the true value is not found in measuring the volume. It's found by the actual experience of the customers, of the audience, of the users while they're trying to complete those tasks. And so, like I said at the start, I'm not going to tell you what to measure. I think I stuck to that. I made a few suggestions. There's a couple of things in there that I think are valuable in pretty much all kind of content situations. But the important thing again is that it's about what you need to measure, based on your goals, based on what you need to achieve. You need to work that out based on your audience and how they interact with you, and the kind of things that you can actually measure about them. And hopefully, I've given you some kind of starting points, some ideas about how you can start clarifying what that is, and how you can start achieving success. Okay, thank you very much. Whenever you listen to this, I should be around during the conference for questions. So just try and find me in the chat or drop me a note on Twitter, and I will see you there.